she's here. February, she might take a little bit of a break because she's going to be standing down into her 6th year as Al Presidente of the NFU. She got, I call it a Good Apple Award today, but this morning it was basically someone who does a great deal of influence in our industry. So well done to that. In her time, she's ridden 30 winners as a jockey. She also was at catering college. She's a pretty good cook. She's also worked with some great chefs such as Jamie Oliver, and she got well over 1 million people to sign the NFU food standards petition. So she's had a massive influence right across the board, and that's why she was really popular when she was on Desert Island Discs and so much more. Less of me, more of her. I give you the president of the NFU, the one and only, the very special and the very here, Minette Batters. Thank you very much.
Oh, goodness me. Can you hear me? People are shaking their... Can you hear? No, they can't hear.
Oh, sorry. There we go. Try that.
Can you hear me now? Yeah, you can. Fantastic. Well, what a great pleasure and a privilege it is to be here. I regularly curse Google, because people can find out things about me that I hope were dead and buried and were before the era of Google, like my racing career, but anyway, clearly not. Look, I want to try and cover off, I guess, some of the breadth and depth of what the NFU is working on at the moment. It's been quite an extraordinary time for me. Working with 3 different prime ministers in the last 12 months has made it even more extraordinary than it was before. And they have, I guess, all skin in the game with the challenges that we are facing into right now. And for us at the NFU, it has really been focusing on working up a policy solution for wherever there is a problem and campaigning for change, campaigning for our voice to be heard. And I guess above all else, to excite people and politicians about the food that they are eating. And no sector excites people more than this sector. So I just want to bring that to life. And when Boris Johnson, sorry, you're going to have to go through some of the politics as well. So the Johnson government of 2019, massive landslide majority. Food didn't really matter back then. We were working, and indeed I remember going with Ali Kappa into the Home Office. Robert Goodwill back in the day was Immigration Minister. And we have had to make the case on every single level for everything that our growers need. And on seasonal workers, it was an almighty challenge. And we started off in 2019 with Boris Johnson with the Home Office saying, well, you can have 10,000 seasonal workers. Well, we knew the sector needed 70,000 seasonal workers, but that was the limit. And actually, it was in October of 2020 that we finally got the uplift to 30,000. That, again, was a Prime Minister that achieved that. So for me, when the election took off again for the leadership with Liz Truss, 49 very memorable days, don't forget, in that 12-month period, when that leadership contest took off, I was really keen to get both of them to engage with the hustings, because prime ministers matter. And as I said, with the 10,000, it was Boris Johnson that got it to 30,000. Might not seem that much, but massively significant. And I'm going to bring to life effectively where we are now. So we hosted that hustings. Rishi Sunak, unsuccessful, of course, in that leadership challenge, came to our headquarters. He committed to setting a new self-sufficiency target, statutory reporting, so a statutory underpinning, but importantly as well, he committed to hosting a domestic food security summit. He wanted to be the first Prime Minister to host it and to make it an annual event. But of course we had to wait that 49 days for Rishi Sunak to come to power. Anyway, he did come to power, and a lot of things have come out of that food security summit that he did eventually host. I can't say that it was hosted willingly, because DEFRA seemingly, for some bizarre reason at the time, did everything that they could to stop it happening. But we have long believed in the need for a comprehensive growth strategy, and this document, I'd really encourage you to engage with it. It's a live, living document, and it will be updated next year. And we really want to have a strong focus for growing this sector in the run-up to the next election, because of all the sectors that I represent, this sector, I genuinely believe, has the biggest opportunity, but it is probably the sector that is under the most pressure. So I met with the Prime Minister, as is now, back in March, and I said to him that we were really frustrated that DEFRA hadn't taken ownership of the horticultural sector, that we wanted to land this growth strategy with them, and he said, look, we will have this food summit. We at Number 10 will work on this. And indeed they did. So on May the 16th, that food summit happened. There were many commitments that came out of it that aligned with our asks. Certainty on seasonal labour. So remember what I said about Boris Johnson. Finally, at that food summit, he announced for next year that we will have access to 45,000 seasonal workers with a 10,000 uplift if needed. I can't tell you the data and the work that has had to go into making the case for seasonal workers. So great to have a commitment for growers for next year, but we are determined in the next 12 months to get a 5-yearly rolling scheme. That has to happen. We have to look at seasonality. We have to be able to stretch some of these visas to 9 months of the year and not 6 months. I want to just spend a little bit of time on costs, because I think this has been the hardest message to land, and bizarrely, with a government and a Prime Minister that one of his core principles is driving down inflation, the lack of understanding of costs in this sector really has been quite something to behold. I have had it widely documented, our frustration that Kew Gardens was able to access the ETII scheme, that's the government's industry intensive scheme. And for growers, protected crops, they were unable to access it. It remains a complete anomaly as to why nature reserves and Kew Gardens could access this scheme and nobody producing the nation's food could have access to it. Now I am told it was simply an oversight by DEFRA and they should have made the case. So we face an extraordinary scenario now where we have businesses that remain locked into high energy deals, high cost energy deals, in a marketplace that probably at best paid, I would say, 60% of those inflation costs. Don't forget we saw wholesale gas prices go at 1.600% higher than where they had been in 2019. So we look at those energy costs, we look starkly, I think, at labour costs. So when we look at the national living wage in March 22, £8.91, the projected national living wage for April 24 is £11.20, and that equates to a staggering, shocking 25% increase in just over 2 years. It's completely unsustainable to carry on that trajectory. So we, as we have done throughout, we've commissioned a new report from Promar International to highlight these inflationary impacts. We really do want to be able to follow up on the 2 reports that we have done, and we want our members to be able to have these reports so that it can aid their discussion with their customers. In all of this, and another outcome of the Food Security Summit was focusing on the fairness in the supply chain work. This has been hard yards for the NFU, with dairy contracts being a very live situation at the moment. It's been years to get the dairy contracts work over the line. We really feel this has got to be about existing contracts and future contracts, not just focusing on future contractual relationships. The egg situation is also well documented, and I made a point of talking about the 1 billion less eggs that were produced in 22 compared to 2019. And again, finally, yesterday, that consultation into fairness in the supply chain in eggs started yesterday. We really hope that the one will start for horticulture in December. And they're talking about conclusions, potentially, and interventions being in 2024. I do caveat this both on eggs and in the horticultural sector with the dairy one that has taken so long and still has not finally been concluded. It really is at a critical stage, and that will be a precedent for horticulture and for eggs, and it's something that we have to get right. I think one of the great challenges that we have faced, particularly at the NFU, is our inability, and looking around this audience, the inability to talk price. And it's been the elephant, effectively, crashing round the room for such a long time. But competition law prohibits us from talking price. And when I read the GCA, the Grocery Code Adjudicator's final report, Mark White, who's obviously taken over from Christine Tacon, and doing a great job, but the headline of that report, retailers have been declaring war on suppliers. This has got to change, and when I look at all the challenges now coming forward on sustainability being the license to trade, and this is really all about fulfilling corporate social responsibility at board and shareholder level. And unless the relationship with the supplier can be recognised as a key part of corporate social responsibility by boards and by shareholders, I don't believe anything is going to change. So for buyers, really, the badge of honour comes on being a harsh negotiator and negotiating a best price. And don't forget what I said about those inflation costs. If the market got 60% back, it was lucky. We are now in a world of deflation. So retailers focusing on deflation when they never paid for inflation. And if we cannot change the culture in retail, we are just going to have less and less production. And that is something that I feel is really important. And I feel the frameworks within the GSCOP as part of the fairness in the supply chain work, we have to start building in this focus on CSR into the frameworks, so that that badge of honour that I talked about does not sit with the buyer having that harsh negotiation. It sits with the responsibility at board level, and this becomes a badge of honour and a competitive badge of honour for shareholders, that they want to be out there in the media with everybody saying this is a great retail business. They have a great relationship with their supplier. They really value what their supplier is doing, and that is where we've got to get to. Otherwise, our food business unit, I've got Christine here with me today, they will continue to upskill our members to have those contractual negotiations with those buyers. GSCOP will continue to try and work with the buyers to make sure they can have a better relationship. It will never end. And what that report of Mark White's did absolutely prove is that this is broken. This is broken, and it's got to change if we are going to deliver on the domestic food security that is needed in this country, and to have the horticultural revolution that we all know needs to happen. I'm just going to touch, I guess, a little bit more on labour and what we need to happen, and then on future funding. So it's really, really important that we get to this 5-year focus on labour, this ghastly, sort of month by month agony of not knowing. And for a business, the number of times I have been told by politicians, why can't they automate? Why can't they automate? Surely they could just automate, as if you could just flick a switch and automate. And the huge levels of investment, the phenomenal R&D that will eventually, in many years' time, drive more automation. But this is already the most automated sector, going as fast as it can go. I mean, the conversations have been torturous. Why can't kids on their way to school pick crops? Why can't people in prisons pick crops? And then, oh dear, I might not be able to compete with that. Hopefully you can still hear me, even if it sounds really loud for me. So extraordinary conversations and the total lack of understanding of how this sector operates and how all the costs at primary production have to go somewhere. When you've got less than 1% profit coming back to the business, surely that tells everyone of the challenges that we face. And then if I look at future funding, and just a quick journey back in time to the Johnson government, don't you remember it was Build Back Better was the party conference slogan, changed into, gosh, I've just set eyes on Mark White, probably don't want showcasing in this audience, but lovely to see you here. And sorry to have used your name in vain, hopefully not too much. So Build Back Better, and Boris Johnson turned it into Build Back Beaver. And so we now have beaver enclosures that are full to bursting with beavers that are bred very successfully on the back of taxpayer funding and want to be released. We have animal sentience committees, we have species reintroduction committees, all at vast expense to the taxpayer. All fine, but when I look at the producer organisation budget, the PO scheme, £40 million worth of PO funding. It's delivered a phenomenal amount. It's absolutely essential to this sector, but it ends in 2025. And it is competing against all of those other things. So 3 prime ministers all leave legacy. Rishi Sunak has committed to food security being a priority. He's really got to show it. DEFRA have really got to show they are as ambitious about producing food as they are for delivering for the environment. So we really do want to see that scheme broadened, expanded, and we want to see a substantial investment that is put in it that is going to continue to drive productivity and lighter touch for our environmental responsibility. The opportunity is there, but as I say, it ends in 25. We are heading towards the end of 23. So we are feeding into that work that DEFRA have recently launched about the next steps. But there is a lot to do to give this industry the confidence that it needs to make those big investments, and there isn't that long to do it in. I can't sort of stand here today and not talk about the other huge challenge, which is the border target operating model and how we are going to be dealing with our import controls. Now, for us at the NFU, there's had to be 2 really important distinctive approaches on plant health and animal health. There are massive issues on cost, on delays, and on biosecurity. And it's really, I think, unforgivable now that the inspection for plants should begin in April 24. But at this moment in time, we are still continuing to press on a daily basis for an authorised operator scheme to be put in place so that we do not have plants waiting to go through a border control point. And that absolutely has to happen. But come on, you know, we left the EU in 2020, we're going into 24, and we still don't have the answer to that question. It's still not over the line. So we've got to get, for growers, they have got to be classified as authorised operators. The safest place for any plant to be coming to is a nursery. They will know what they are doing, but we still don't know what is in place. I hope that's given you a bit of I won't have done justice to everything that the team are doing, but in every conversation I have, without the NFU, and we've got Jack Ward here, British Growers, I hope, Jack, you and others feel that we've been a convener. Got Ali Capel here from British Apples and Pears, who's done so much for this industry, both in her role at the NFU and in that role. I hope as much as anything that we've been a convener of everyone for this sector, because time is not on our side, and there are some things now that the clock is really, really ticking on. And ticking for me too, because I have 4 months left effectively in this role, and there are some things that I desperately want to get over the line. I think at the forefront of all of that, you have to start with setting that self-sufficiency target. It is completely unacceptable for any party now, having left the EU as an independent trading nation, to be able to say, well, actually, do you know what? We'll set targets for house building. We'll set targets for tree planting. Previous governments set targets for species reintroduction. We'll set targets for green energy. Do we need a target for food production? No, we've got it written in words, and those words are sitting on a shelf in a document. That is completely unacceptable. 70 million people on an island nation. We absolutely need to make sure that we have a statutory underpinning to a new self-sufficiency target, and we start to take this industry seriously, because the opportunity is enormous. And it is so in the national interest that we are producing more of our food with the climate that we have, that we're producing more of it here on our own shores. So I'd like to see, as a first, that self-sufficiency target set in stone. I would like to see a genuine ambition and a real commitment by all parties that this is going to happen. I can't say that we're talking about this in any other sector, that it needs to grow. This sector needs to grow on every single level. If Anthony Snell were here, he'd be saying, don't grow the berry sector anymore. But the point being, he is here, and he is saying that. But look, you know, now is the time. I can honestly tell you that in the run-up to the election, the rural vote is really going to matter for all parties, and it needs all of us to really act on this and deliver it. And the final thing I'm going to say is what I mentioned about corporate and social responsibility. This is the greatest threat, I think, to this sector. If they're not going to pay for it, it's not going to happen. And the sector is just going to continue to contract. And coming here, it's my third time at the National Fruit Show, and every time I come here and all the businesses I meet, what do I hear every time? Contraction. And the weather events of this year, the weather events of last year, and the weather events of this year, and who knows what the weather events of next year will be throwing at us. You know, we can do it, but this sector really does need to have politicians who want to work with it, because it is the one sector that can go. But if they're undermined on price, they'll be undermined, and ultimately they'll be put out of business. So price really matters. Mark, it's really brilliant to see you here. That 49-day period I talked about with Liz Truss, she did her level best to merge the GCA into the CMA, which have been equally disastrous. So although things might look tough out there now, it could have been a whole lot worse. So let's make sure we get a fair price for our growers. Let's make sure we set that self-sufficiency target, and let's make sure that we grow this sector. Stop there. Thanks so much.
Minette, obviously any questions from the floor. Kathleen has a microphone to come amongst you. Kathleen, behind you.
May I sit down?
Just maybe say who you are.
Oh, good. Minette, oh, there we go. 10 years as president is a long stint by anybody's bet. What are your recommendations to your successor? What were your 3 key pieces of advice for whoever comes next? And their 3 focus areas, either in how they survive or how they're going to thrive.
Oh goodness, it's actually 6 years as president. It does feel like a decade. In fact, it feels like 2, and I was 4 with Marag as deputy. Look, I've been really fortunate to work with a really, really outstanding team, and Tom Bradshaw is my deputy president. Nothing to say that he will be the next president. But look, if he were, I know he'd do an outstanding job. I think he absolutely gets, you know, the opportunities and the challenges for the sector. my advice, I guess, would be we have to continue to campaign. I've been very keen to talk about food and less about farming, effectively, because if we're talking about food, we're really resonating with everyone. I don't think I was talking to Ali about it earlier. I don't think we've begun to touch on the health benefits. Why are we not talking about health when we're talking about food? Why are we allowing health to be owned by the sort of junk food industry and highly processed food? Why are we not positioning ourselves into the health agenda? So that would be something that I feel frustrated about, that I haven't had time to get more involved in. I really hope whoever my successor is, that they will continue to push on price. Every time I mention price, I get our lawyers breathing down my neck saying, I'm not mentioning that. But we've got to find a way, and working with Mark and others, we've got to change the language, and that's why I talk about CSR. And if we don't change that, and these investigations into the supply chain don't come up with some meaningful solutions, that is going to be really, really damaging. You know, we can talk about POs and funding options, but primarily what the people I represent, they need access to markets, and they need markets that will pay a fair return for what they're doing. That's what they need more than anything. So I guess talking about food, talking about health, really making the case on that. I think politically, I have walked a tightrope, and my successors will walk a tightrope, between wanting to box people around the ears and shout and scream and say this is outrageous and getting hurled out of the room, and not being too meek and mild that you get walked over. And that is to a certain extent the same with retail. You know, you've got to be in there, and that's why the technical team at the NFU and others across the industry is so important, that we are not just saying what's wrong, we continue to work up the policy solution. I hope that my successor will continue to focus on net zero and the ability for us to get to carbon neutral food production, because I think that is really exciting, and I think that is about how we produce more and lighten our footprint. And above all else, I hope they continue to champion it as the most exciting sector that there is.
Can you hear? Yes. Minette, thank you for a fantastic speech. Really worrying at the end of the day for a lot of us. I just want to make a point and then ask a question. I think we're going to have even more problems with the supermarkets, because out of the 4 we've got now, the 2 Morrisons and Asda have got new ownerships. They've taken on a huge amount of debt. And I think it's going to be a very, very bumpy ride with them. But my point is, and I really feel passionately about this, is the only one that is going to change the supermarket's mind is getting the consumer on side. They're their customers, they're the things like that. I know Ali's doing a great job with British apples and pears, but it's getting a message to the consumer that they are going to lose out if we don't have enough of this beautiful fresh food. And I still don't know how we do it in a way that really wakes it up. It was easy for us years ago because we had the French not taking lamb, but it's the consumer that is going to change the supermarket mind, nobody else at the end of the day.
Yeah. Teresa, look, I couldn't agree with you more, but I think it is I think it is various different things. I mean, I do think Mark has a big role to play in this, because I think, you know, we were 10 years while we were in Europe getting the role of the GCA embedded. So we were continually told, no, we don't need it. And now I get other member states coming to us and saying, how did you do that? How did you get it in place? And now I think now is the time, another 10 years on, 2 decades later, to really say, right, how is this fit for purpose? Consumers matter, but all the surveying will show you, the moment you survey consumers, they will talk the talk, but they will go in and they will buy on price every single time, bar a few. So they are important, but you know, this has got to be a wake-up call, I think, on supply. You know, we have faced the rationing of eggs. Not all of that linked to avian influenza, some of it, most of it linked to cost of production. That is why the egg sector shrunk, and we faced rationing of salads because there's been no ambition here for us to be gaining our market share, dealing with import substitution in a way that we should be. And, I've met some incredible businesses that really we should be rolling them out across the country. And so there are, I think, a lot of different things that need to happen, but are quite straightforward to resolve if the ambition is there. And, one thing that we have got here that other countries don't have, and why we've been such a target market with these trade deals, is that we've got 70 million people on an island. So this is a prized market that everybody wants access to. But on the horticultural side, there's a limit to what we're going to be importing. And Morocco has already proven, with weather events, that we cannot keep relying. Spain, we know we cannot keep relying on Spain with water security challenges that they are facing. You had Italy declaring a state of emergency, you had Portugal in a state of emergency, and yet here we are with retailers telling government, don't worry, Spain will keep sorting it out. It won't, and it hasn't. So I do think nothing unsettles people more than rationing. And I mean, it was perfect timing in some ways for us at our conference last year when it was front page of every newspaper with Asda rationing salads. And I said to Therese Coffey, as many of you heard, well, we've had market failure in eggs and market failure now in fresh produce, but she disputed. It wasn't market failure. Well, if you're facing rationing, I'm sorry, there's market failure. So look, I hope that this election is going to be a really competitive one. And, we're an apolitical organisation, as you know. So we're speaking to Labour and the Lib Dems as much as we do to the Conservatives. And I really hope that one of them, but don't forget, not one of them is committed to self-sufficiency and annual reporting. Well, I can tell you what, with 3 yearly reporting that is in place at the moment on the back of the Agricultural Act, in 3 years, a sector could be half the size that it was in that time. So unless you've got annual reporting, you will just see slippage. And we've got to be able to have that annual reporting so that we can do something about it if we need to.
Thank you. Hello, my name is Rodrigo. I'm a student from Capel Manor College.
I think it's coming in now.
I'm a student from Capel Manor College. There's quite a few of us here.
I can't.
I'll shout.
Shout, yeah.
I'm a student from Capel Manor College. There's quite a few of us here today. And I think as young people it can be a bit daunting, the issues that agriculture faces. And I think it can be quite difficult for us to imagine what we can do as students or young people or people who don't own farms or rural businesses, what we can do individually to ensure we have a future in agriculture. What would you say we can do as individuals or as students or as maybe smallholders as well, people with small amounts of power, I suppose?
Well, first of all, I think it's brilliant that you're here, and I think it's even more brilliant that you've asked a question, because 9 times out of 10 people don't get to hear and they don't get involved. I mean, look, for us, the whole focus on education right the way through that journey, primary, secondary, into college, into university, we have to be changing the mood music on food production, and we have been focused on linking agriculture to STEM learning so that we really do drive the farmers and the growers of the future coming into these businesses. I visited a pepper business the other day just out of Bury St Edmunds, completely sustainable, pulling hot water out of Bury. They are absolutely focused as a business to be able to be getting people in from the local community. They said, look, we could bring someone in here. We are confident we can have a creche within the business. We could be bringing people in here who can put their children in the creche. We know that we can train them up to be a grower in that business in a decade, and they'll be on 100,000. Now, stories like that, when we're pulling so many people in and we're talking about this sector as low skilled, low wage, I mean, those are criminal words to my mind. This is a sector where you really can scale that ladder, and there are so many opportunities and living examples of people who have come in, started at the bottom and worked their way up. Now, you're a long way up the ladder already, to be able to go into those businesses. But again, you need those opportunities. So I think it is about linking it up, and, great, the Prime Minister committing to maths. But actually, why not be focusing on the jobs that are out there that really are what the sector, what the industry, what the country needs. And so often when we talk about it as low skilled or unimportant, when going back to that era of trust when Ranald Jaiwardena was in there, trying to make the case to people how exciting this sector was. I took him out to Phil Maddock's business, which is one of the largest salad growers in the country. And all he wanted to do was to get on the big kit, effectively, and have a picture taken on one of the big cutting machines. And I said, look, this is not easy work. If you are working in a rig and you are picking effectively, X number of lettuces every 60 seconds, you're selecting them, cutting them, that is phenomenal. Could you do that? And he said, no, I couldn't even begin to do it. And so we've got to turn it around, and from the beginning to the end, because if we don't turn it around at the beginning and cut that sort of claptrap about low skilled, unskilled, nothing will change in the rest of it. But look, I still, 10 years down the line, if this gives you confidence, I feel more passionate and more optimistic about the sector than I have ever done. But there are some critical things that I've talked about that need to change.
Minette, Catherine Pace, the new president of the show, taking over from Teresa Wickham, a tough act to follow. Thank you very much from me as well for your talk and for being here in this rundown in your career as president of the NFU. I think one of the things we can really value having you here is your perspective and the different sectors that you've been involved in at such a high level for 10 years. Is there anything you could deduce from what you have seen in terms of improved relationships between one sector and the retailers or customers and another sector? Because we all know from the ONS figures that some sectors have done better in getting price increases. The time to be able to achieve that is running out. But what gives a sector the ability to achieve a better relationship with their customers?
Catherine, it's a great question. I mean, what gives a better relationship? Well, the classic supply and demand. So the supply and demand model is what gives the better relationship. So you've seen extraordinary, really, for someone like me who predicted the demise of the sheep sector from pre-no deal Brexits and throughout. It was all going to be bad news for sheep. But actually, when COVID struck and everybody started living at home and eating at home as if they were going out, they, after a period of time, started buying lamb. Aldi sold more lamb in COVID than it has ever done. And if I look at beef prices, again, supply and demand. If you have tight supply, price is good. If you have oversupply, price comes down. So when we went into COVID, everybody, the bizarre things going on, people were panic buying loo roll. They were only eating mince. They weren't eating steaks. They weren't eating joints. They ate mince and more mince and more mince. And price fell off a cliff because the chillers were filling up and up and up with steaks and joints, and nobody was eating all of it. That then changed. We had a lot of campaigns. The supply and demand model kicked back in again, and everything righted itself. There was that blip. For those sectors, the danger is trade deals. You've got Australia Beef and Lamb who are over here now. They are really focused on the food service sector. They are focused on grain-fed as being a premium over grass-fed. It won't need much to come over here in the food service sector to upset that supply and demand model. Now, on dairy, last year, everybody was thinking, gosh, the dairy farmers, 50p per litre and plus, what is not to like? The danger, and it was Arla that was able to trigger what happened, because basically Arla were able to say to Tesco's, you don't move the price on milk, we're going to run out of liquid milk. And predictions were for 12% shortfall in the autumn. So, effectively the checkbooks came out, the price was committed to. What happened? Oversupply. And you look at where milk price is now, you know, if you're Arla, you're on 32p per litre, and you're ticking all the sustainability boxes and everything else. So it is that supply and demand model, Catherine, that is key. I think the challenging bit is those sectors that are closest to the market. So that is eggs, poultry, meat, pigs, and fresh produce. They are unsupported sectors, and the baseline of compliance effectively is rising all the time. Jump through more and more boxes. National living wage, I mean, 25% in the next 2 years. I mean, that is just absolutely farcical and is unsustainable going forward. So for those sectors that have that much closer relationship, I think we've really got to look at a radical change. And we're quite unusual in fresh produce to Europe, where they do have that supply and demand model. Wholesale tends to sit above retail. Here, retail sits at the top, wholesale sits underneath, and that's a massive issue. Which is why I think it needs a multitude of different things to get to the right outcome. So, you know, there've been winners and losers, but all of it driven by supply and demand. I think that.
Great. Thank you so very much.
I'll get out of the way. Thank you.
Traffic control headphones off.